An Army reservist has been kicked out of the service for refusing to take the anthrax vaccine. A military panel took 40 minutes to return a guilty verdict against Private Kamila Ivanowska and 2 hours to determine her penalty. Ivanowska was charged with a bad conduct discharge, which is just one level behind dishonorable discharge. The prosecutor had asked the panel to give her 6 months in jail. She told her superior she considered the shot medically dangerous to children she might have in the future. And Private Kamila Ivanowska joins us on the phone right now. Welcome to Democracy Now!
Thank you very much.
So you've been thrown out of the military?
Yes, I was, well, not officially yet, but yeah, I received that kind of discharge, so soon I'll be following, they will follow up with, removing me from the base.
Can you explain further why you refused to take the anthrax vaccine?
Sure. Well, what happened was, the refusal goes back to, prior to my military service. That's when I was made aware of anthrax vaccine by one of my friends who declined to join Air Force for that reason. And, she raised a red flag in my mind. So what I did, I phoned my recruiter and I asked if I, would have to take the anthrax vaccine even if I were to deploy. And at that time, I was told that the vaccine is not required. So I went ahead and sign up for the military, and and then I was faced with this, with the fact of anthrax again in November 2002, when once again I was told by a military physician that I would not have to take the vaccine, and then on January I officially refused it, and I was charged with disobeying an order. And my main reason why is because the side effects that I read about were alarming. There was a lot of people who were getting sick from that, particular vaccine.
Well, Private Kamila Ivanowska, we are going to go to a documentary right now that talks about just that issue.
Okay.
Since 1998, when the vaccinations began, nearly 500 active duty service members have refused the vaccine. More than 100 have been court-martialed. Today on Democracy Now!, we're going to broadcast Direct Order, an award-winning documentary directed by Scott Miller and narrated by Michael Douglas. It tells the story of members of the military who were ordered against their will to take the controversial anthrax vaccine. This is Direct Order.
Since 1998, we have given mandatory anthrax vaccinations to over 600,000 of our young men and women serving in the military. Extensive research has revealed many of them have died, and reports are that thousands more are ill. Doctors say these people suffer from Gulf War syndrome. The military tells us it's an emotional ailment. We do know that the vaccine given them was not approved by the FDA. We do know that refusal to take the shots has resulted in dishonorable discharge, fines, and prison. We do know that mandatory anthrax vaccinations are set to continue. Every 3 months, a new list of victims is published, which includes the names of young Americans who the military says are suffering from emotional disorders. The list continues to grow. This time we know in advance of the impending problem. If there is only one victim, we should be concerned. But there are thousands. These people are sick. This time we should listen.
It was some sort of a misguided experiment.
I didn't question it. I was an officer, and I just rolled up my sleeve and did my duty.
My name is Earl Stauffer. I'm a Tech Sergeant E6 in the 326 Airlift Squadron at Dover Air Force Base. I'm a load master on the C-5s. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I'm what you call a reserve bum. Do it full time, or was. And received the anthrax vaccine in January, February of '99. That changed it all.
Know how emotionally, intellectually, and in every other way, the horror of human experimentation. Unfortunately, human experimentation continues to this day, and is done largely by governments, including the United States. right now.
And other than the usual pain from receiving vaccines, some rather unusual things started happening to my health. My ears started ringing also the morning after my third shot. In fact, it woke me up. I thought the television was on. That hasn't stopped since. We're going on 40 some odd months now of non-stop 24/7 screaming in my ears. But mid-April in '99, a couple of months after my third anthrax vaccine, I was sitting on my sofa one Sunday morning, enjoying life, windows open. I live on a farm, sunshine, blue skies. Next thing I know, I'm heading for the floor. Me, coffee cup, everything. About 30 to 45 minutes later, I was able to crawl to the bottom of the stairs of my farmhouse and get my wife's attention and tell her something was wrong. Well, she came downstairs. That lasted for about 6 hours that day. But the bad thing of it is, it started happening every other day for about a year and a half. My wife, friends, kids tell me I look as though I'm 80 years old. My head's up against the wall. Rapid breathing, rapid swallowing. Jaw hangs open. I can't close my mouth. My jaw just hangs open. And bad circles under my eyes. The next day after these, quote, gray outs is what I'll call them, I'm just trash physically. I'm physically done. You know, just I couldn't get off the sofa if the house was on fire.
Jeff Moore, Tech Sergeant in the Air Force Reserve. I have 18 years, 6 or 7 months in right now. I didn't know about the anthrax shots during the Gulf War. In September '99, President Clinton signed the Executive Order 13139 that allows DOD to experiment on us without our signed consent and knowledge if they deem it in the interest of national security. And it was funny how that came out at the time when the hoopla, the fear was, and the frenzy over this was, well, almost at its height, really, or the beginning of the biggest period of interest. It got to a very crazy, it got very hectic in the squadron because of the fear around this. The crew was pulled aside and told to march into this tent. They were told they were going to be given a shot. It was classified. That had to do with livestock, and they were not to talk about it, and there were supposed to be no side effects from it, and that the shot would not be annotated in their shot records. So he and one other person on the crew slid out the door, unseen by anyone. They figured if it ain't gonna be on the record, they can't prove they didn't take it. I started seeing the doctors at Walter Reed. By then, the arthritis had spread more. They gave me a waiver, and they had done some blood work, and at that time I had tested positive for ANA, which is, I believe, anti-nuclear antibodies, which detects an autoimmune system flare-up. Then I started developing short-term memory problems, forgetting the smallest of things, and not normal everyday forgetfulness that you would think of. Just from 1 minute to the next, I would completely lose track of any discussions that I'd had or whatever the events were that I had just done. Then I started with dizzy spells and had fatigue for a few days where I couldn't get off the couch, literally, except it was all I could do to get up and eat and go to the restroom. I'm still in the military at this point. I was just recently, as of 1 month ago, permanently grounded, so I'm no longer allowed to fly. I don't think you can impress upon anybody with enough emotion or sincerity about how this can drastically alter your life.
In the only public study ever done, it was found that 30% of all vaccinated members of the military have reported some chronic illnesses they claim are due to the anthrax vaccine. These symptoms have become known as Gulf War syndrome, which the military contends is an emotional problem. The names you are seeing on the screen are just a few of the thousands and thousands of our young Americans to whom this is more than an emotional disorder. They have come forward to ask for our help. They say they are all dying because they followed a direct order to take the anthrax vaccination.
Major Tom Remfer, and in the U.S. Air Force Reserves. My military experience after 4 years at the Air Force Academy included about 7 years of flying F-16s, followed by a few years of flying the A-10, and then couple more years of flying the F-117, and then I went back to the A-10 until the anthrax vaccine program ended my flying career. Ironically, the very first time I heard the word anthrax vaccine or heard about the initiation of the anthrax vaccine program, I was actually deployed over to Kuwait, and we witnessed on a satellite television broadcast, as a result of our Department of Defense officials being asked how they're going to protect our forces as a result of the UN inspectors getting kicked out of Iraq, they ended up announcing that they were going to use the anthrax vaccine. The way it was presented to our unit was that we would lead by example, we'd be the tip of the spear, and we'd be the first guard unit to take the anthrax vaccine. And that stirred up a little bit of dissent in the unit. People didn't really think that was necessary to lean forward and be so aggressive and take the vaccine when we all knew that there were folks that we'd served with in the past that suffered symptoms of Gulf War illness, and there were certainly questions about the unresolved maladies subsequent to Gulf War service.
I'm Frank Fisher. I'm a physician. I still have my commission. I'm a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force Reserve Medical Corps. On September 24th, I remember it vividly, we had a mobility formation. We got all our shots updated and everything. Well, we only got one shot updated, and that was typhoid, which I didn't realize had to be updated. I thought that was pretty much good for the duration. This technician, who I remember distinctly had no rank or name tag.
After one vaccination, Lieutenant Colonel Fisher developed bone marrow loss, Tourette syndrome, and a breathing disorder.
With the uniform code, the appearance code is 3510. She pulled me over and gave me a shot, and I asked her what it was. And she said she just shook her head and didn't say a thing. And then pardon me for the first thing I did was almost reflexively hand her my shot record, and then she just handed it back to me unannotated. Then I asked her what it was that she'd given me, and I was getting upset because, number one, I mean, I had to know this in case anybody asked me. It should have been on the shot record, and I wanted to know for my own good. I mean, I'm board certified in internal medicine. I know what I'm supposed to be getting. So I asked her what it was that she gave me, and she told me that she just waved me back into the line and in essence told me to get lost.
David Ponder. I'm 24 years old. I'm a second-class petty officer. I got convicted on January 12th of 2000, which is 1 year exactly to the day I refused a shot a year before. I was sentenced to 60 days in the brig and reduction from E4 to E2.
First Lieutenant Jamie Martin. As part of my mission qualification, I had to go take a laundry list of shots, and one of which was the anthrax shot. I took shot number 1, 2, and 3 as I was told to do. I did what I was ordered to do to become mission qualified. With each shot, my reactions were getting progressively worse. The first shot was not a big deal. Second shot, I kind of had the flu-like symptoms for about 5 or 6 days. They went away. Then it was time for shot number 3, and that was the kicker for me. That's what makes me angry now, is that they still do the ballroom dance, that they're still dancing on the subject, and there's still information coming in, and they still stick by their guns, and they still say that there's nothing wrong with this vaccine. They're criminals.
My name is Cheryl Angerer. I was a captain in the Air Force Reserve. I had my first and only anthrax shot in April of 1999. Eventually I was grounded because of it, and they sent me to Walter Reed Medical Facility for some tests. I don't know, life certainly has changed since then. And so I guess it's more the betrayal. And, I never would have believed that the government would do something like this, but I would have given my life for my country. It's a violation not only of your body and your health, But it's a violation of just your whole life. You know, and your being.
Hello, Rich Rove. I'm from Rochester, New York, and I'm coming here today to speak with you as a citizen, not as an officer in the United States Air Force. And what I'll relate to you is from my perception, and my perception only, and shouldn't be misconstrued as that of the Department of Defense or United States Air Force. It baffles me that people, the ill people, are not being heard. Again, they go through the old saying that was used was, these people are malingerers, liars, and whiners. Oh, they're air crew members. They're flyers. They've got egos a mile long, and they're just whining. They don't want to fly, and I find that offensive.
Lieutenant Rich Rove is a male nurse with 17 years in the service. He has medically treated many members of the military who are suffering from various symptoms of Gulf War syndrome. On the 21st of July, 1999, Lieutenant Rove went to Washington, and because of his rank, he was allowed to speak to the Congressional Committee on behalf of his fellow members of the military. By doing so, he risked his standing in the military community.
For every one individual that comes forward, there are 3 individuals that will not. After I testified, like I said, my career began to take a steady nosedive. I was viewed with suspicion, in some circles ostracized. There was a time when I was pulled out of the clinic to work on a flu shot line as a skilled, qualified lieutenant. I had no problem performing an extra duty if it was for the good of the mission. But I was taken from my clinic duties, removed from my clinic duties, and was to administer flu shot for 20 some odd days. At that point, I said, oh boy, this is getting rough here. But I went ahead, saluted smartly, and pressed on. And then I found out that they had brought out the anthrax vaccine, and even though I did not have to give it, the vaccine was still going to be administered on the flu shot line. I had some concerns, and I said, if we're administering this vaccine, which is currently controversial, and you always hear that, the controversial anthrax vaccine, we're giving this controversial vaccine, we should be trying to collect good data on people that are receiving it. So we were giving multiple vaccinations, including those who were due for their anthrax vaccine, on a flu shot line. Now, how in the world can you determine if a vaccine had caused an illness or an adverse reaction when you're giving it concomitantly with other vaccines?
My name is Sammy R. Young, Y-O-U-N-G. I'm a retired Air Force Medical Service Corps Reserve Colonel, and I'm a retired former investigator and regulatory official with the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, where I served for 29 years and 2 months. I don't think anybody even knew anthrax existed. The thing is, for maybe a half century nearly, the people at Fort Detrick and some people at CDC had been working with it. And it was pretty much a secret initiative that was being conducted under a bioterrorism program of some sort. And it wasn't generally known. The public didn't know. The Center for Biologics Evaluation, in response to a direct question from me in the question and answer session, admitted that they were going to administer anthrax vaccine to postal workers and possibly CDC or other healthcare personnel that did not meet federal specifications for approval. And the definition of a product that doesn't meet federal specifications is that it's an adulterated product. I think that was the problem. They were not able to produce any lots for distribution to the DOD because they couldn't pass the FDA inspection. This is where I say this is not just a military situation. This bodes evil for the American public.
My name's Rhonda Lynn Wilson, and I'm 26 years old. I was a CW2 in the Army. There's 2 pilots, a left seater and a right seater, and it's a weaponized helicopter. So we have the 50 cal machine gun, the ATAS, 2.75 rockets, and Hellfire missiles. Our PT scores are, the highest is 300, and I was maxing out on my physical training. I think I always blame myself a little bit for not being smart enough to really, I guess I was naive, thinking that they would never harm soldiers. I was the only female pilot in the cavalry where I was stationed, so I kind of stood out a bit. I took 3. My first one was in December of '98, and my second one was January of '99, and my third was May of '99. Actually, I started off at 154 and went down to 90-something. No, nobody can help me. But maybe I can help someone. So now I just have to come to grips with how I am and how I have to live every day. Because it's not much of a life, and I didn't deserve it. Because I was a soldier first, and then an officer. And even though aviation was my love, the military was my life.
The Pentagon is not publishing this information. You have to assume that there's something that they want to keep hidden.
John Buck, and I am a captain in the United States Air Force, stationed at Keesler Air Force Base as an emergency physician. Myself, I did not want to receive the vaccine, and I did not want to put the Air Force in a compromising position by having a physician come out against the vaccine. I refused the verbal order. I was then given a written order, and I refused the written order. And I realized at that point the issue had become much bigger than myself, simply not wanting the vaccine. And federal law prohibits using investigational or experimental medications or vaccines on our troops without informed consent. Well, informed consent means that the individual has the right to be explained the risk and the benefits, but ultimately can decide for themselves whether or not they choose to have the medication or the vaccine. And that was not occurring with the anthrax vaccine. Once I found myself in the position of being the first physician to be given the order to receive the vaccine, I felt responsibility. So I took that stand, and I was offered an Article 15, at which time I was told my commander would discipline me, and most likely I would be kicked out of the military with less than honorable discharge, which I did not feel that I deserved. So I refused the Article 15, and in doing so, the only other option is to say that you're demanding trial by court-martial. I went through the court-martial process and was found guilty, fined $21,000, and reprimanded and sentenced to 60 days on base. September 11th occurred, I was one of the first teams to leave Keesler. I did tell my commander that I would cooperate in any way that I was asked to, so that I was able to deploy. And I deployed to an undisclosed location with an EMEDS team, which is a group of physicians that provide care out of a series of tents. In the initial phases of after disobeying the order, prior to what's called an Article 32, which is like a grand jury hearing, I had a meeting with my commander and the commander of the hospital, and we discussed the merits of the vaccine or the shortcomings of the vaccine, and he tried to convince me the importance of me taking this vaccine. And for I felt like this was way above my head, that I'm just a captain and a young physician, and I had my entire career ahead of me. I don't have any animosity towards my commander or anyone within my chain of command, and I think that the Air Force as a whole has been very fair. The jury, I felt, was very fair. For what they were allowed to hear, I could easily be spending 5 years in Leavenworth because they were just simply not allowed to hear anything. I do not condone disobeying an order, and I think that order and discipline is an integral part of our military. But I also think honor and integrity in federal law is important also.
I believe that even our commander had serious concerns, and that was expressed to us by some of his subordinate commanders as to the reaction he got from the Pentagon. And essentially, we were told the same thing that they were told, that there are no answers to your questions and you're all going to line up and take the shot. And that didn't settle well with anybody in the unit.
They've told me that I don't have an anthrax problem. I don't want an anthrax problem, because if I have an anthrax problem, they'll send me to a board that can evaluate me and take away my wings.
All right. I got the lead on the right. Sights on. Left 9 now. Belly home. You got the airspeed on me. Visual. Oh, there you are.
My name, Major Russ Dingle, former flight commander at 810, instructor pilot at the Connecticut Air National Guard. And I was forced out of the Guard based on my refusal to take the anthrax vaccine. I spent my whole aviation military career flying A-10s. I could not ask any of my men to do something that I was not willing to do, and I was not willing to take the vaccine based on my belief that the order was illegal and immoral. There was so much of an outcry over it that the commander formed a team, what's known in the military as a Tiger Team. It's a little short action, short notice, a small group of people that's going to intensively investigate any particular situation to find answers. And the atmosphere soon turned hostile, and that's when we knew that something was wrong. One study shows it's good is good, then 2 studies must mean it's better. And so now all of a sudden we have 13 studies since 1997, when the first 37 years or 30 years, only 3 studies had been done. The Army did all the research, the Army owns the patent, the Army paid for the licensing studies. The Army has been essentially the sole customer since it was licensed in 1970.
I too believe, like others, that there were good intentions. But pardon me for saying this, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. You don't do this to your own, especially in the United States. You know, we defend democracy and freedom in the world. This is an absolute contradiction to that.
It was worse than being raped, because I was betrayed by everything that I was proud of and everything that I morally stood for. I joined the service so I could serve and give my life for the country. But I didn't think I'd have to give my life this way.
Probably found a lot of folks in the anthrax vaccination line, but for a group of us, we felt that it was essentially unconscionable to turn around and take the vaccine when there were legitimate, unanswered safety, efficacy, and quite frankly, legality questions about the experimental nature of the vaccine.
The one smoking gun that Congress and the rest of the authorities, the folks wearing stars up here, seem to fail to want to address. You know, it's our pilots, our enlisted people, people like me, people like the others that are paying the price for it. You know, I'd rather have caught a bullet from an AK-47 than gotten injected with this stuff. At least I would have known what my fate would have been. You know, am I going to be alive 2 years from now? Or am I going to join the ranks of some of my buddies that are passing away? Or in wheelchairs? Or walking on crutches?
Force Reserves, Air Reserve Technician, Dover Air Force Base, Delaware. Except for a 2-year hiatus, 32 years. Vietnam, Gulf War, Grenada, Panama, and all the little deals in between. I took the 4th shot in November of 1999, and within 2 weeks of that, the Air Force sent this gigantic, rank-laden team to Dover. More stars than I've ever seen at Dover Air Force Base. There were 3 stars, 2 stars, 1 stars, and every one of them had 3 or 4 full colonels to get coffee for them. I mean, it was the most incredible team I've ever seen. It was every high roller in the anthrax vaccine program was there to talk to us because the active duty wing commander had called the timeout.
Each man or woman would say, I was perfectly healthy, and I took the anthrax vaccine and I immediately became ill. I had vertigo, headaches, severe fatigue. Now I have an autoimmune disorder, or some would say I have a thyroid problem, or some would say I have multiple sclerosis symptoms, or some of them would say I have lupus symptoms. They were going to the hospital, and the hospital was telling them initially, oh, you might have had a reaction to the anthrax vaccine, which they knew they did, only to be told later on, oh, it wasn't the anthrax vaccine. We don't know what's wrong with you, but it wasn't the anthrax vaccine. So these people, as a last resort, were going to the highest command on base saying, I'm hurting, and the medical community is making a mockery of it. So the commander called the people into the theater in May of 1999. I'm not for sure what day it was. But he said, I want to hear from you folks. And one by one, they stood up and told their story in the commander's call. And he brought a doctor from headquarters to listen to their complaints. And the doctor stood up after he heard many of their complaints and said, look, I don't know what's wrong with you people. All I know is we have a mandatory program and you're going to take it. Then the commander showed him, who was the commander, and said, no, no one at my base is taking it.
About 15 minutes ago, I made the decision that based on concerns and questions that need to be answered, that no one at Dover Air Force Base will receive the anthrax.
No one at my base is taking this medicine anymore, not till somebody gives me answers. He adjourned the meeting. He called the Pentagon. He said, this is Colonel Felix Greta, commander at Dover Air Force Base. I've suspended the anthrax vaccine at this base until somebody gives me answers. He got answers immediately. The 3-star general, the highest ranking medical officer in the Pentagon, and his staff showed up at Dover Air Force Base the next morning.
Dr. Lee Rogers, just stand up. Dr. Alving, Dr. Dana Bradshaw in preventive medicine, and Dr. Friedlander from USAMRIID, Colonel Fred Gerber, Colonel Crowder, Harvey Crowder, Lieutenant Colonel Borowski from the Joint Program Office, Dr. Pittman from USAMRIID, Colonel Williams, because there is the at least loose connection in people's mind with the alleged Persian Gulf illness.
They reconvened a commander's call and told everyone that there's nobody sick.
I have done my 6th initial series. I'm due my booster in July. I have had immunization from lot 020. I am not concerned about the safety of this medication.
That it's safe and effective, and it's FDA approved, and the program will go on.
Let me say this as succinctly as I can. There is not, there never has been, squalene as an adjuvant in the anthrax immunization. Period.
I'd like to have an answer why I have anti-squalene antibodies in my system. You know, there's medical research that's been around for 30 years that indicates this is unsafe. This is very harmful to people. It's an oil-based adjuvant. It's a big no-no to use on people. Why did the FDA find this in 5 anthrax vaccine lots?
I know that we have a safe, effective vaccine against a uniformly fatal disease that our adversaries have weaponized. It is a force protection issue. I know that squalene is in fact a red herring. It is not, has never been, will not be in the immunization for anthrax. 020 and 030 have been tested. All the rest are going to be tested, and that is so that you will know that in fact we listen to the issues that we see published.
If there is no squalene in the anthrax, then I want to know. And I want to know not just from the military, but I want to know from the people that are saying that there's possibly squalene in it. And I want to know from credible sources like in Stockholm or National Institute of Health. And I'm not hearing that. And until I hear that, I don't feel confident in ever taking another shot. And if I have to get court-martialed to not take another shot, I will get court-martialed not to take another shot.
I'm sorry.
The commander stood up and in so many ways retract what he said, and he told the folks.
I said on more than one occasion this morning that there has never been and there is not squalene in the anthrax vaccine. I believe him. I expect you to believe him, officer in the Air Force and the United States Air Force Surgeon General. He is the most credible person on this subject today. So I expect everyone here in the Dover team to believe that. I believe that what you are seeing is a huge amount of concern to address this issue. The timeout that I called last Wednesday was to address concerns. They are addressed to my satisfaction. And you can see the United States Air Force and Army representatives here bending over backwards to address those concerns.
The bioport production line is now up, and we're about to go into phase 2, which is immunization of the early responders, and then phase 3, of course, is the total force.
I haven't seen that many for an ORI. For the kickoff of a war, I haven't seen that many stars show up. There's something bad, something real bad is going on here. But again, you know, you try to be a good trooper. You suck it up and press on.
An extension of Agent Orange in Vietnam, the syphilis used on the Tuskegee Airmen, the radiation of World War II, God knows what else. Instead of being sprayed with the chemical this time, they're injecting us with it. What's the difference?
Even the Nazis never experimented on their own troops.
Anthrax in the hands of our enemies that would kill thousands and thousands of soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines. This vaccine protects against that possibility.
Oftentimes you find that people will protect the institution rather than disclose the truth, and as long as the institution stays intact, they're protected.
Before the anthrax vaccine program began, the FDA shut down this facility, Bioport, that makes the vaccine because of 30 major violations in the manufacturing process. It was shut down until January 2002. During the entire time the anthrax vaccine program has been a direct order, the Bioport manufacturing facility has been unable to make the anthrax vaccine. They failed numerous FDA inspections with gross violations of basic standards. None of the vaccines given until January 2002 were FDA approved.
You got to ask the question yourself, okay, the vaccine's not FDA approved. They find this out in 1998. The same year she starts taking the shot. 5th shot in Fort Riley, 6th shot in Fort Riley. 3.5 weeks after her 6th shot, she pretty much out of the blue wakes up one morning and she's on her period and it's pouring right out of her, just pouring. And she goes to the clinic there on the base and they're assuming, oh, she might have some virus or something, and they have her sitting in the waiting area while, you know how ERs are, you take care of the priority cases first. And so she was sitting out there. At the time, they didn't, without knowing it, they didn't know it. She was dying. Kinsey is convinced to this day that her mom passed away because she cut her finger, because that's what she remembers. She remembers being home with her mom and that happening.
I'm a doctor. I can say with as much confidence as medicine can say about this vaccine that there will be no long-term consequences. Not to say that there aren't side effects. Of course there are, like any other vaccine.
I eventually became so sick, and I was alone, and I was having problems with memory lapses, and I couldn't remember things. I couldn't remember hours. I couldn't remember what I did for an entire day. I couldn't drive at times. I wasn't eating. I was down to chicken broth and saltines if I was lucky. And then later on found out I was having like seizure episodes, and I eat something, I'm still hungry. It's like I'm starving. It's like I'm starving and there's a Thanksgiving dinner around me all the time. There's food everywhere. I want to eat. You eat something and within 10 minutes I'm in the fetal position crying. And crying in pain because of the cramping and the nausea and the vomiting, and that goes anywhere from a half hour up to a couple hours. And I don't care how strong you are, after a period of time you have your own personal defenses and you can't put yourself through that pain anymore.
I went to headquarters, talked to General Starbuck. He treated me very well. He treated me with respect. General Starbuck told me that he wished more officers had my kind of integrity. He wished more officers stood for what they believed, like I was doing. He asked me what the problems were. He asked me how to fix the problems. And then he thanked me for talking with him and wished me on my way. And I left that day thinking I knew the Air Force was a good place to be. It's a great day in the Air Force, and I felt like the weight of the world was lifted off my shoulders. That there was a commander out there that was a commander. And he was going to take charge, and he wasn't going to let another officer or another enlisted man take a hit over this poorly managed vaccine program. And it was about 10 days later I got my notice to leave the Air Force.
More than 100,000 veterans have reported experiencing symptoms attributed to Gulf War syndrome. There's not a single reported case of GWS among our allies. The Kuwaitis, Egyptians, or Israelis. The Egyptians contributed 40,000 troops to the coalition force. Not one of these allied troops received the anthrax vaccine. Abnormal levels of squalene have been discovered in the blood of ailing Gulf War veterans. The Pentagon and U.S. medical authorities offer no explanation for the presence of squalene in blood samples from ailing military personnel. Bioport Corporation, under a single-source contract with the U.S. government, has manufactured 6.3 million doses of the anthrax vaccine. Cost? Over $10 per vaccine. In September 1998, Secretary of the U.S. Army, Louis Caldera, gave the military order to indemnify Michigan-based Bioport Corporation. Bioport will not have to bear the cost of lawsuits pertaining to the efficacy of the anthrax vaccine. Instead, the U.S. government will be liable.